What happens when a mother is forgotten on the one day that matters most? The choice she makes next sends shockwaves through her family, and leaves everyone questioning what truly matters. It was Sunday morning, and the scent of lilacs drifted through the kitchen window as Margaret Ellis set the table for breakfast. She sliced oranges, poured fresh coffee, and arranged the pastries she'd picked up from the bakery, her own small celebration of spring and the tradition she'd cherished since her children were small. Mother's Day had always been her favorite, a day when her family gathered, when hand-drawn cards covered the fridge and laughter filled the hall. This year, the house was quiet. Her son, Adam, a junior at the State University, hadn't come home for the weekend. His twin, Emma, was even farther away, lost in the demands of her college internship. The only sign of life was the distant thump of the washing machine and the faint hum of Margaret's old cat, Jasper, as he wound between her feet. Margaret set out the good plates, the ones with blue cornflowers, and checked her phone for the 5th time that hour. No new messages. She scrolled through social media, photos of friends holding bouquets, breakfast trays, handmade gifts, posts tagged #BestMomEver. She smiled for their happiness, but a hollow ache crept in. At 9, she called Adam. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. She tried Emma next. "Hi, Mom. Can't talk. Meeting soon. Love you," was the text she got, with a shower of heart emojis. No call, no mention of Mother's Day. Margaret typed a gentle, "Have a good day, sweetheart," and put her phone away. She filled her day with chores, laundry, dusting, and watering the garden. She swept the front porch and watched her neighbor's family arrive in a flurry of balloons and gifts. The neighbor's kids waved. "Happy Mother's Day, Mrs. Ellis," called Lily, 5 years old, holding a bouquet nearly as big as herself. Margaret smiled and waved back. "Thank you, Lily." She watched them disappear inside, their voices carrying down the block. At noon, she made herself an omelette and ate alone at the kitchen table. The house felt bigger than usual, the ticking clock louder. She thought of past Mother's Days, Adam waking her with coffee and burnt toast, Emma insisting on making pancakes, the three of them curled up watching movies, Ed still alive, grumbling good-naturedly about syrup on the couch. The phone remained silent. Adam's online status flickered green once, then vanished. Emma posted a picture from a cafe, #workgrind, #hustle. Margaret typed a comment, erased it, and closed the app. In the afternoon, she walked to the park with Jasper on a leash. The sky was bright, children chased kites, and a group of mothers shared cake on a checkered blanket. Margaret passed them, smiled politely, and sat on a bench near the rose garden. Jasper curled on her lap, and she stroked his fur, letting the sun warm her skin. She returned home to find her neighbor, Mrs. Kim, leaving flowers at her door. "For you, dear. My daughter made an extra bouquet. Happy Mother's Day." Margaret thanked her, heart swelling with gratitude and a pinch of envy. Inside, she placed the flowers in a vase, poured a glass of wine, and reread the birthday cards on her mantel, some faded, some new. She lingered over Adam's childish scrawl from years ago, Emma's crooked hearts, Ed's steady script. By evening, the ache turned to resolve. She cooked herself a steak, watched her favorite old movie, and tucked herself into bed with Jasper curled beside her. The house was silent, but Margaret's mind whirred with thoughts, not just of what was missing, but of what she still had the power to choose. She switched off the light, the day's loneliness crystallizing into a quiet strength. As sleep pulled her under, Margaret decided, this was the last Mother's Day she would spend waiting. Margaret woke early on Monday, sunlight peeking through lace curtains. The ache from yesterday lingered, but she shook it off and dressed for work. At the kitchen table, she sipped coffee and reviewed the week's bills, sorting them into careful piles: mortgage, utilities, Adam's tuition, Emma's housing deposit. Years of careful budgeting had made her proud, but lately, each envelope felt heavier in her hands. She texted Adam a gentle, "Good morning. Hope classes go well today. Love, Mom." A single THX came back, nothing more. She tried Emma next. "Call when you're free. Miss you." The message stayed unread. Margaret left for the library, her part-time job a comfort and a distraction. She reshelved books, helped a toddler pick out storybooks, and chatted with Mrs. Kim, who stopped by for gardening tips. "You look tired," Mrs. Kim observed, concern softening her voice. Margaret just smiled, brushing away the question. It was a quiet weekend. Midday, the library buzzed with children on a field trip. Margaret led them through the stacks, answered questions about dinosaurs and fairy tales, then retreated to her desk, fingers tapping anxiously at her phone. Still nothing from Emma. No call, no "Happy Mother's Day," not even a late-night apology text from Adam. Lunch was a lonely affair, half a sandwich at her desk, listening to co-workers share stories of their family brunches and handmade cards. She laughed at their jokes, offered congratulations, and slipped away as soon as she could. Outside, the sky darkened, clouds threatening rain. Margaret hurried home, clutching her purse tight against the wind. At home, she changed into gardening clothes and dug her hands into the soil. The physical work soothed her, pulling weeds, staking tomato plants, deadheading the tulips that Emma had planted as a child. As she worked, her thoughts drifted back through the years: first steps, lost teeth, late-night fevers, piano recitals, college acceptance letters. She'd always tried to give them everything, even when Ed got sick, even when she was left to do it all alone. A sharp cry startled her, Jasper tangled in the garden netting, yowling for help. She rushed over, freed him, and gathered the frightened cat into her arms. "It's all right," she soothed. "I've got you." For a moment, she let herself cry, silent tears slipping into Jasper's fur. Evening fell. Margaret made a simple dinner, soup and toast, then checked her bank account. The tuition payment reminder for Adam blinked in her inbox, Emma's housing deposit due at the end of the month. Both children had always counted on her quiet reliability, her sacrifices. She'd never missed a payment, never let them see her struggle. She stared at the screen, hands trembling. The ache of yesterday sharpened into something else, a stubborn pride. She texted Adam again, "How are you? Do you need groceries?" No reply. She closed her laptop, put away her phone, and turned off the lights. In the darkness, Margaret made a decision, not out of anger, but out of the clarity that comes from being unseen. If her children could forget her when it mattered, maybe it was time she remembered herself. That night, she slept soundly for the first time in months, Jasper purring at her feet. The house felt emptier, but Margaret's resolve grew quietly, like roots pressing deeper in the earth. Margaret woke on Tuesday with a new energy humming in her veins. She dressed in her favorite navy sweater, ran a brush through her graying hair, and decided to walk to the market instead of driving. The air was brisk, scented with cut grass and distant lilacs. Passing the bakery, she waved to Mr. Gomez, who handed her a fresh croissant for the best library lady. His kindness brought a soft smile, a reminder that small gestures matter. At the grocery store, Margaret checked her list twice, careful with each dollar. She chatted with Mrs. Patel in the dairy aisle, compared prices on coffee, and took her time choosing apples. No rushed calls, no requests from Adam for more spending money, no texts from Emma needing help with rent or textbooks. For once, the silence felt like freedom. Returning home, she paid bills in the sunny dining room. She set aside the mortgage, the electric, and her car insurance. Then she stared at Adam's tuition statement. The due date glared from the page, a red warning. Emma's housing deposit paperwork sat beneath it, still blank where Margaret's signature should go. For the first time, she didn't feel guilt, only the weight of her own choices pressing back, steady and calm. Margaret poured herself a second cup of coffee and sat on the porch. Jasper curled on her lap, purring as she watched children ride by on bicycles. She thought about Ed, his steady laugh, his "let them make their own way, Maggie," when the children pushed too hard or forgot a promise. He'd always believed in boundaries, in the dignity of self-respect. Margaret realized how much she'd let herself be shaped by her children's needs, always putting herself last. She made lunch, a grilled cheese and tomato soup, and called her sister, Diane. They talked for nearly an hour. Diane's children had sent flowers and called 3 times on Mother's Day. Margaret didn't mention her own disappointment, but Diane heard something in her voice and pressed, "You okay, Marg?" "I'm fine. Just a quiet weekend," Margaret replied, the words honest in their own way. After lunch, she dug through old photo albums, reliving birthdays, holidays, school plays. Each snapshot was proof of the years she'd given: endless carpools, late-night science projects, tearful breakups, tuition advances. She wondered if either child remembered those moments now, or if their lives had moved so quickly they forgot the hands that steadied them. As afternoon turned to dusk, Margaret tidied the guest rooms, once Adam's and Emma's, now mostly empty, sheets fresh and corners dusted. She lingered over a box of Adam's trophies, Emma's faded dance shoes, her own wedding dress stored carefully in tissue paper. Each item was a marker of care, of time given. Evening brought a call from Mrs. Kim, inviting her to a garden club event next weekend. "You must come, Margaret. We need your expertise with peonies." Margaret accepted, the promise of laughter and companionship a comfort. Before bed, she checked her email. Still nothing from Adam or Emma. No call, no note, just the steady march of tuition reminders. Margaret tucked the unpaid bills into a folder, closed it with a sigh, and made herself a cup of chamomile tea. She curled up with Jasper, the house silent except for the ticking of the hallway clock. The silence felt different now, not an absence, but a space. Space to think, to heal, to remember who she was before she became only Mom. As she drifted to sleep, Margaret made herself a promise. She would keep her word to herself, even if it meant breaking old habits. Wednesday dawned overcast and cold, a steady drizzle tapping against Margaret's windows. She made tea and stood in the kitchen, watching the street as early commuters hurried past with umbrellas and coffee cups. The house was too quiet. She missed the sound of her children's laughter and Ed's low, early morning voice. But she also felt a growing distance, a necessary space she could finally see clearly. She spent the morning cleaning the attic, a task she'd put off for months. Cardboard boxes lined the dusty beams, Adam's old model airplanes, Emma's scrapbooks, Ed's tools wrapped in oilcloth. Margaret sorted through forgotten keepsakes, setting aside a box of books for the library's next sale. She found a stack of Mother's Day cards from years past, some hand-drawn, others last-minute store-bought, all once cherished. The most recent was from Adam, 3 years old, his scrawl clumsy but heartfelt. "I love you, Mom, you're the best." She ran her thumb over the faded crayon, letting the ache come and go. A clap of thunder jolted her back. Margaret packed away the cards and headed downstairs, suddenly craving company. She called Mrs. Kim, who invited her over for tea. In Mrs. Kim's cozy kitchen, the kettle hissed and cookies cooled on a rack. They talked about gardens, aging, and the unpredictability of grown children. "Sometimes," Mrs. Kim mused, "the ones we love most need to remember how much we do." Margaret nodded, feeling seen. The rain eased by noon. Back home, Margaret checked her email. A single message from Adam. "Hey Mom, can you transfer $200? I need to fix my car. Thanks." No greeting, no question, not even a belated Mother's Day. Margaret stared at the screen, heart hardening. She closed the laptop without replying. She spent the afternoon at the library, shelving returns and helping a teenager find research materials for a school project. Mr. Gomez from the bakery dropped off a tray of scones. "For the staff," he winked, slipping Margaret a cinnamon roll for later. The kindness of small things warmed her, reminding her that appreciation didn't always come from family. Back home, she opened the tuition statement again. Her hands were steady as she reread the instructions, the payment portal glowing on her screen. Adam's next semester hung in the balance. One click would solve his problem, keep him on the path she'd sacrificed to pave. But Margaret hesitated, the memory of Mother's Day sharpening her resolve. She closed the browser. Evening brought a gentle peace. She watered her peonies in the gray light, their petals heavy with rain. The neighbors' children raced by, shouting and splashing, their mother waving with a smile. Margaret waved back, then sat on her porch with Jasper, watching the world go quiet. Inside, she wrote a letter to Emma, sharing news of the garden, library, and her upcoming plans. She asked about Emma's work, offered advice, and slipped in a note, "Hope you're taking care of yourself. I'd love to hear your voice when you have a moment." She sealed the envelope, her handwriting neat and strong. Before bed, Margaret tucked the unpaid tuition bill into her nightstand. She pulled the old Mother's Day cards from her robe pocket and lined them along the dresser, proof that love once lived here, even if it was sometimes forgotten. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought not of loss, but of the ground she was quietly reclaiming for herself, inch by inch. Thursday brought a rare patch of sunlight, so Margaret decided to start the day with a walk. She strolled through the neighborhood, Jasper trailing on his leash, waving to dog walkers and joggers. The fresh air felt cleansing, and Margaret found herself thinking less about what was missing and more about the possibilities she'd neglected for herself. Returning home, She watered her houseplants and played Ed's old jazz records. As the music drifted through the living room, Margaret sorted through her finances again. Mortgage, insurance, utilities, groceries, and the 2 looming tuition payments. She calculated her budget 3 times, double-checked her checking account, and realized just how many small sacrifices she'd made for Adam and Emma. Extra hours at the library, saying no to new shoes, postponing repairs for the house, even skipping her annual trip to visit Diane. A knock on the door startled her. Mrs. Kim appeared with a bag of groceries, eggs, milk, and a fresh loaf of bread. "You looked tired yesterday," she said, setting the bag on the counter. "You're always looking after everyone else, Margaret. Let us help sometimes." Margaret felt a wave of gratitude and a sting of embarrassment, but she hugged Mrs. Kim tightly, promising to return the favor. After lunch, Margaret answered a call from the college's financial aid office. The woman on the other end inquired about Adam's overdue tuition and Emma's housing deposit. Margaret listened, her voice even, "I'm aware of the deadlines. I'll be in touch if anything changes." She hung up, feeling both anxious and powerful, as if she were finally allowed to consider her own needs. Later, Adam texted, "Did you get my message? The car broke down again. Can you send money?" Margaret took a deep breath and, for the first time, didn't answer immediately. Instead, she called Diane. They talked about old movies, favorite recipes, and the invisible labor of mothers. Diane listened closely, finally saying, "Marg, you've done more than enough. They're grown now. It's okay to ask for something back, or to do nothing at all." Encouraged, Margaret spent the afternoon at the garden club, trading seeds and stories with Mrs. Kim and 2 other women. She laughed freely, sharing the story of Adam's failed attempt to mow the lawn as a teenager, Emma's disastrous high school science project, and the time Ed tried to make pancakes for dinner. The laughter felt healing. Returning home, she opened her laptop and read the tuition instructions one more time. Her finger hovered over the Pay button, but she clicked Save for Later and closed the screen. As dusk settled, Margaret roasted vegetables from her garden and invited Mrs. Kim to dinner. They ate on the porch, watching the streetlights flicker on. Margaret felt lighter, her home, her rules, her boundaries finally set, if only in small, private ways. Before bed, she reread Diane's last message. "You don't owe anyone your silence, Marg. Let them feel your absence, just once." Margaret turned off her phone, tucked the tuition envelopes away, and wrote in her journal, "I can choose myself, too." She slept deeply, her dreams uncluttered for the first time in years. Friday dawned with a hint of storm in the air, but Margaret welcomed the gloom. She made herself a hearty breakfast, scrambled eggs, tomatoes from the garden, and a cup of strong black tea, enjoying the simple satisfaction of cooking just for herself. Jasper wound between her legs, tail flicking, hopeful for a scrap. Margaret spent the morning at the library, shelving returns and chatting with Mr. Gomez, who brought in a donation of picture books. She found herself smiling easily, offering recommendations to a young father and sharing gardening tips with Mrs. Kim. During lunch, the staff gathered in the break room to celebrate Mrs. Allen's retirement. Margaret joined the laughter, telling stories from her early days at the library, the warmth of camaraderie helping to soften her mood. On her break, Margaret checked her email, a new message from Adam, "Mom, did you pay yet?" and a calendar invite from Emma, asking her to Venmo half of next month's rent. No greetings, no thank you, no call about Mother's Day. Margaret sighed, deleting Adam's message and leaving Emma's invite unanswered. That afternoon, she worked in the garden until the clouds opened, sending her and Jasper scurrying inside. The storm's patter against the windows was comforting. Margaret curled on the sofa with her journal, writing a list of things she'd sacrificed. Weekends, vacations, new clothes, nights of sleep, her own birthday plans. She realized that her children's needs had become a kind of weather, ever-present, sometimes fierce, sometimes quietly expected, but never once pausing for her. Feeling a surge of boldness, Margaret picked up the phone and called the financial aid office. She calmly explained that tuition payments would be delayed, that family priorities had shifted. The woman on the other end thanked her for her honesty and promised to update the record. Relief flooded Margaret. She made a cup of tea and called Diane, relaying her decision. Diane laughed softly. "It's about time, Marg. I'm proud of you. Maybe now they'll see how much you do, by noticing what happens when you don't." Margaret spent the rest of the day in small acts of self-care, baking muffins, painting her toenails, listening to music Ed used to love. She called Mrs. Kim and agreed to join her at the movies on Saturday. For the first time in ages, she felt anticipation, not dread, for the weekend. As evening fell, the rain cleared, leaving the world washed and bright. Margaret made herself a cup of hot cocoa and sat at the window, watching stars blink to life above the wet street. She thought of Adam and Emma, wondering if they'd notice her absence, if they'd remember the quiet power behind every paid bill, every sacrifice. She slept deeply that night, comforted not by answers but by the simple act of choosing herself. Saturday morning, Margaret awoke early to sun streaming through the curtains. She dressed with care, blue slacks, her favorite floral blouse, and put on a spritz of Ed's old cologne, savoring the scent. Her plans with Mrs. Kim felt like a small holiday. They met at the corner and walked to the matinee, laughing over a slapstick comedy, sharing popcorn and the comfort of friendship. After the movie, they browsed the farmer's market, chatting with vendors and sampling fresh bread and strawberries. Mrs. Kim bought Margaret a bunch of tulips. "For all you do and for all you will do," she said with a wink. Margaret hugged her, feeling lighter. Home in the afternoon, Margaret checked her phone. 5 missed calls from Adam, 2 from Emma, and a string of increasingly urgent texts. "Mom, they put a hold on my class registration. Please send money. Mom, I can't pay rent. What's going on?" She placed her phone face down on the table and went out to the garden, letting the tension roll off her with each weed pulled and each blossom pruned. Midday, Adam called again. Margaret answered, her voice even. "Mom, why haven't you paid tuition? I can't register. They sent me an email." "I know, Adam," she replied. "I told the office there'd be a delay. I needed to reconsider some priorities." "What does that mean?" "I'm going to lose my spot." Margaret listened to his frustration, feeling a strange calm. "Adam, I've supported you and your sister for years. I'm asking for some acknowledgement, a thank you, a phone call, even just remembering me on Mother's Day." Adam fell silent, the weight of her words settling in. I'm sorry, Mom. I was busy. But this is important. Can't you just do it this once?" Margaret shook her head, though he couldn't see. "It's important for me, too. I want to help, but I can't keep giving without anything in return." They ended the call awkwardly. Margaret stood at the kitchen window, heart pounding, not from guilt, but from the relief of finally saying what she'd swallowed for years. Emma called that evening, her tone sharper. "Mom, my landlord's threatening eviction. Why haven't you paid?" Margaret listened quietly, then replied, "Emma, I need you to hear me. I've always been here for you. But I was alone on Mother's Day. I can't keep giving if I'm invisible." Emma's silence stretched, then broke. "You're right. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't realize." Margaret's voice softened. "I love you. I always will. But this year, I'm asking you both to love me back, with words, with time, not just with bills." They ended the call with a promise to talk again soon. That night, Margaret joined Mrs. Kim and Diane for dinner. They toasted to boundaries and bravery, to the courage of asking for more. Margaret returned home and stood in her darkened living room, tulips glowing in moonlight. She whispered, "I am more than their wallet. I am their mother." She fell asleep knowing the ripples of her decision had finally begun to reach her children. Sunday morning arrived with a chorus of birds and a soft breeze through the open window. Margaret lingered in bed, Jasper curled against her ribs, sunlight warming the quilt. She let herself savor the quiet, her mind finally free of the constant calculations and reminders that had haunted her for years. She rose slowly, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and made herself French toast, thick slices dusted with cinnamon, just the way she liked. After breakfast, she carried the tulips from Mrs. Kim to the dining room table, letting their color brighten the whole house. The home felt alive, if only for herself. By late morning, the phone rang. Diane, cheerful as always, asking about the week. Margaret told her about the movie, the market, the confrontation with the children. Diane laughed, proud and supportive, and promised to visit soon. The call left Margaret feeling grounded, seen. Shortly after, Adam texted, "I'm coming home to talk. Please don't ignore me." A knot of anxiety twisted in Margaret's stomach, but she told herself, firmly, that she had a right to her boundaries. When Adam arrived, his face was pale, eyes ringed with worry. He stood in the kitchen doorway, hands in pockets, and shuffled his feet. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't think. I just—" Margaret motioned for him to sit. She made tea for both of them, pouring it carefully, as if the ritual itself could steady the room. "I'm not angry," she began. "But I am tired. I want you to succeed, but I also need to know I matter." Adam's voice cracked. "You do. I thought you'd always be there, no matter what. I forgot to say thank you. I forgot to check in. I'm sorry." Margaret listened, letting the apology settle between them. "I need more than words, Adam. I need you to call sometimes. I want to be part of your life, not just your finances." They talked for an hour, about college, plans for the future, the feeling of being overwhelmed. Adam promised to do better. Margaret promised to keep helping, but not at the cost of her own joy. That afternoon, Emma called, her voice softer than before. "I talked to Adam. We should have been there for you. I'm so sorry, Mom. Can we come visit next weekend? Can we do something together?" Margaret smiled through tears. "I'd like that." She spent the rest of the day in her garden, the sun on her back, hands in the cool earth. Mrs. Kim brought over a slice of berry pie, and they shared a quiet hour on the porch, talking about mothers and daughters, the stubbornness of love, the slow work of change. As evening fell, Margaret gathered her bills, paying what she could for Adam and Emma, but this time she did it on her terms. She set reminders for her own needs, doctor's appointments, a trip to see Diane, dinner out with friends. The calendar on the fridge filled with color. Before bed, Margaret sat with her journal, Jasper purring at her side. She wrote, "I am not invisible. I am more than a mother. I am myself, and that is enough." The house was quiet, not with loneliness, but with peace, a home reclaimed, a life rediscovered.